Hello, my name is Salya Wirachman, and I am recording on the documentation of how to play my board game, which is The End of the Ocean. So, this game is basically a Mario Party-esque game, which is a roll and go mechanic game, but with a hexagon grid and using a underwater theme instead of a Mario theme. So, the first components are there's a board game. This is the map setup. They have different terrains. For example, this is a different shallow terrain, uh, a shallow terrain, a short terrain, different names of terrains, and then they have a market or discovery. The other components are that we have standees with four-player avatars, a diver standee, three of them, and then an upgraded submarine standee, three of them as well. And then we have dice to denote for oil patches and then for movement in the roll phase. So, and then we have action cards as well as coins and resource tokens. So, the goal of the games is to get these resource tokens, three of them, and the first player to get some wins. And you have a lot of resources to do so. So, how to set up this board game is that first you set up the map like as in the GDD stated. And then the process of the gameplay itself is that a player has a turn which is consisting of three phases. Well, four, but three in general, which is first the player decides to roll the dice. The number of dice determines the action points. And then after the roll phase, you decide to do an action phase. What this means is that on action phase, if you have an action card, you can actually play the effect of the action card at that phase. And lastly is the movement phase, where you can decide to use up your action points to move to a specific grid or to save it up. So the resources that are needed is we have three resources. First of all is coins, action points from rolling, and then resource tokens. So first, to actually play the game and to start the game, a player chooses an avatar of a diver first. They take a dice, a D6 dice, a single action card from the pile, and then 5 coins. This is what a player should start up with. So, after a player already sets up, to start the phase, a person needs to roll a d20 to determine their turn order. And when that turn order is decided, a player could place their player avatar on a shore terrain, which is the ones denoted by the 1 line. So let me talk about the terrain first then. In terrains, we have 6 types of terrain, starting from the shore, the shallows, the reefs, the open ocean, and the abyss. Lastly is the discovery and market, but these are special terrains. So what terrain means is that the amount of cost to move or pass through a terrain is denoted by the lines that is in the card itself. For example, the shore is 1 stripe of line, so it costs 1 action point. The shallows is 2 squiggly lines, which means it takes 2 action points to pass through or to move through. The reefs needs 3, and so on and so on. But lastly, an abyss card, the spiral one, you require a submarine to actually traverse that. The reason is that these abyss cards are the only places where you can actually get resource tokens. So when starting up, what you need to do is that these terrains have different specific reasons that can be placed on them, which is oil patches and resource tokens. That's for the normal terrains. For the special terrains, which is this market and discovery, they have different effects, which is stated in the GDD. Market, if a player lands on the market, you can draw 3 action cards and decide to buy them or not based on the cost on the upper left side of the corner cards. If they don't, they can just put it back and shuffle the deck again. That's what market does, and you can also buy a submarine from those markets to upgrade you to be able to traverse through the abyss terrain. A discovery terrain, meaning that if a player moves through or lands on a discovery terrain, they just draw the topmost action card, and then they keep it. So this is basically the terrain, but then how do you get the money to purchase an upgrade submarine or an actual cost card at the markets? To do that, you need to generate coins. The way you generate coins are two things. You can either have an action card that can give you coins, or the main way is to have oil patches. So when a game starts, on how to set up oil patches is that in the GDD, if you roll a 1, it lands on the 1 cost terrain. So if you need to roll a d6 6 times to determine where an oil patch is. So I roll a 3, I put an oil patch on a 3, and then repeat for the next 6 dice of oil patches. So for example, when I move to an oil patch, an event happens where you can roll a d6 to determine how many coins do you get in that oil patch. So I roll that, I get a 5, so I take 5 more coins. After a player gets to use the oil patch as their resources, they have to roll a d6 again to determine if the oil patch moves or not. The reason is that I do not want the player to actually stay there and keep generating resources. So the resources can move. So if they land on a 4, now they move to a 4 cost card. But the player that rolls this can decide where to put it. But the type of terrain that is supposed to be placed on is decided by the roll of the dice. For example, I rolled a 4. I have to take this oil patch to a 4 on any of the board, but because I want to be strategic, I place it the nearest 4 terrain. That's how oil patches work. You roll a dice. You first land on the oil patch. You roll a dice to determine their coins that you can collect from them, and then roll a dice again to move. But to make sure that the coin generation is not purely RNG, in the GDD, another rule is stated. You can, when you roll on the roll phase, you can have a lot of action points that you won't need, right? So you can save them up. When you save the action points, you note it down by the side of dice. For example, I rolled a 4. I only use 2 to move, so I have 2 left. I can use that stored up action points when I land on a oil patch to actually convert these action points into coins. So like I got 2 saved up action points, I can get 2 coins from that. So the whole game is based on that. The winning condition is to get these research tokens, right? So you need the first player to actually get these research tokens would win the game. You need 3 of them. And these will only spawn at an abyss terrain. So to make this balanced, since the map is designed to place the abysses on the middle and each corners, while the starting points are always in each sides. The first ever startup of a research token, there can only be, as the GD stated, there can only be 1 research token on the board at the same time, and the first one will always be in the middle. And to get that research token, the process is that you save up a lot of money. When you have a lot of money, a player needs to visit the market. At the market, the player can upgrade buy an upgrade from a player to a submarine that costs 15 gold based on the GDD. So you take off the player diver standee, you replace it with the submarine standee. And then you can traverse the abysses. So afterwards, you wait until your turn starts, you roll a dice, and if you're lucky enough to be able to land on the research token, to actually get the research token, you need to spend money on it. Like, the explanation to this lore is that you need to invest something to get out a research, right? So the first cost to get a research token if a submarine lands on it is that you need to pay 5 coins, and it increments 5 every single token you actually get. So the first purchase for this blue player, for example, cost 5. I got 1. The blue player got 1 token, and then the next token would be decided by the player at the last place. So the second token would cost 10 because it increments by 5. And if a player gets a token, the last place player, which is decided by the least amount of tokens and the least amount of gold, can decide on where to put this next research token anywhere on the map with an abyss grid. So they could actually force the first player on a bad position. So you have to be strategic on who you try to sabotage or not. So, for example, the last player is the yellow player, and they place the next research token here away from the blue player's middle, so it will make them a disadvantage, right? That's how I try to balance these nuances. Back to the cost again. So the increment of each token is 5. Meaning that the first token a player can purchase costs 5, the second costs 10, the last one costs 15, is to make sure that each player has to manage the resources first, instead of just racing to buy a submarine and buying a research token at the abysses. So that's the whole main concept of the loop itself. So to repeat myself, there are 4 phases, which is the roll, the action, and then the move phases. And the fourth one only happens when it's called the event, and only happens if they land on a oil, a discovery, a market, or a research token. So on roll, the player rolls the dice to determine how much action points they have. They can use it up or store it for the next turns. The second phase is the action phase, where a player can either sabotage or give themselves an advantage. For example, add 1 dice to your roll phase next turn, or steal another player's money. So a player can only use 1 action card at a single action phase to either create an advantage or a disadvantage. And then they will decide on the move phase to either move using their action points or just store their action points up. Remember that the cost to move is based on the lines on these terrain cards. And lastly, event phase happens if if a player passes or lands on an oil patch, which is to generate coins by rolling a dice. A discovery terrain, if a player lands, they get 1 action card. A market terrain, where if a player lands or passes, they can upgrade to a submarine if they have the amount of money, or buy more action cards if they have the money. And then lastly, on a research token, if a player can land and buy that research token to actually progress the game itself. And that is all for the end of the ocean tutorial. Thank you very much.